We've got a ton of PC news to talk about today. Unfortunately, a lot of it's bad, and let's start out with the Intel news. We've already heard a ton about stability issues on Intel's 13th and 14th gen CPUs, but the exact extent of those problems and the underlying cause is still unknown. However, game developers are starting to feel the brunt of these issues, both from their customers as well as running their own game servers. And check out this quote just released by Alderon Games. They say the failure rate we have observed from our own testing is nearly 100%, indicating it's only a matter of time before effective CPUs fail. That is stunning. Nearly 100% failure rate in their testing, and they have a lot of servers, chips to test, their owns to test. They have game crash reports from their user base. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Now, I will also say that I don't think that necessarily one game developer knows everything about this entire issue, nor do they claim to. And while they're not, advocating, exactly what you should do, they are saying that to avoid issues, they're taking certain actions, like migrating servers. So they're swapping all of their servers to AMD, which experience 100 times fewer crashes compared to Intel CPUs that were found to be defective. Their hosting recommendations are advising anyone hosting Path of Titans or servers, that's the game they're talking about here, or selling game servers to avoid purchasing or using 13th and 14th gen Intel CPUs. And they're adding in-game notifications to players of their game, saying that we're adding a pop-up message in-game to inform users with these processors about the issue. Many users are currently unaware of why their game is crashing and what they can do about it. So that is some absolutely stunning numbers. They're trying to say that they're not trying to endorse buying one brand over the other, but they are switching, their own use case over to AMD platforms, which they're finding much more stable. And again, this is a game developer just trying to do what's best for the stability and financial situation of their company. They're saying that they've identified failures in 5 main areas: the end customers, because they've had thousands of crashes on Intel CPUs, especially on 13th and 14th gen CPUs in their crash reporting tools. Official dedicated game servers were experiencing constant crashes, taking entire servers down. The development team, which was developers using these CPUs, face frequent instability while building and working on the game. It can also cause SSD and memory corruption. Game server providers hosting community servers with persistent crashing issues, benchmarking tools, decompression and memory tests unrelated to Path of Titans also fails. So, this is just one game developer, but they're saying from all these endpoints, the developers, the users, the game servers, all of them are just showing massive failure rates and saying that when they switch over to AMD, they're having 100 times better stability. That's absolutely stunning. Now, they're not the only game developer starting to go on record with these types of issues. I found this article with the Warframe staff reveals Intel's 14th and 13th gen CPUs are responsible for instability issues, with the i9-13900K taking up a major portion. I followed this article to its source, where on the Warframe forums, you see a developer talking about, while investigating crashes in Warframe, we came across a particular series that were not crashing in our code, meaning it wasn't the game code crashing. They were crashing from NVGPU comp64.dll, which is a component of NVIDIA drivers. So it seems like an NVIDIA driver crash. And it is crashing running that piece of the NVIDIA drivers. However, doesn't seem to be an issue with the driver code, because after aggregating hundreds of reports from helpful players, they discovered a pattern. Almost all were coming from systems with 13th and 14th generation Intel processors. So to interpret this graph correctly, we do need to be careful, because what they're saying here is this is not trying to indicate the percentage of these CPUs that showed this failure. What they're saying is, if this is a pie chart of 100% of their reported NVGPU comp64.dll crashes. So this particular crash in Warframe they tracked the system stats of all the systems having these crashes, and these were the CPUs that were showing those crashes. The 13900K leading the pack at 29.5% of these crashes were on an Intel i9 13900K based system, whereas the 14900KF is 18.7 and the 14900K at 15.3 and the i9 13900KF at 12.3. I mean, so if you add up the 13900K and 14900K and their variants, this is over 3/4 of the pie chart for this particular crash. So while it's a driver crash in the GPU driver, it's being triggered on the systems with these Intel CPUs. And if you notice the rest of the sizable chunks, they're all Intel CPUs from the 13th and 14th generations. We get a few like 13900KSs in here, 14900KSs, so you can add that to kind of those bigger chunks as being basically the same type of CPU, but you also get some of the 700K types from the 13th and 14th generation. So it seems to be the high-end Intel CPUs and the ones being pushed the furthest on the clock speeds. And if there's any AMD stuff in here at all, it was such a minor percentage, less than 1%, that they weren't even listing those. So, and again, so it was unclear from the data set what those other tiny pieces of this pie are. But this looks absolutely atrocious. And this is just tracking this one game crashing issue that these game developers were facing. They also talked about having one of their own staff members had this issue on their home computer, although not his office computer with the same kind of stats and things like that. Now, so basically this is pointing to some pretty big issues. They are saying that generally, what the things that Intel has been trying to do to combat this has been to issue the driver stability, BIOS settings that are less aggressive on clock speeds and things like that. And that solves some but not all of the problems, it seems like. Now, on another note related to that, Level 1 Techs has a video discussing similar issues. Now, he cites some game developer sources as well as others for a lot of his analysis in this video, although the sources in this video weren't named. So it's unclear if Alderaan Games or the Warframes developers are some of his sources, or if these are separate sources citing similar issues, because as far as I could tell, like I said, his sources in this video were not named. However, he had some really interesting information talking about is it just the clocks, is it, because again, Intel seems to be trying to pass the buck as, motherboards are driving their CPUs too hard. But the really interesting thing here is he talks about the servers that are running these chips are on motherboards that are not the, gamer motherboards where you often would be overclocking them and they'd have hard settings pushed out of the box. He talks about the fact that these are server-grade motherboards, W-series motherboards, where generally the clock speeds on both memory and the CPUs themselves are very conservative because the goal there is like 100% stability on 24/7 use cases. So it doesn't seem to just be running them full bore out of the box and motherboards pushing them super hard, which seems to be what Intel is trying to do to fix the issue. And again, I will link all my sources in the video description, so I recommend watching this full video for more information on his analysis of the situation and all of that, because it's very interesting if you want some insight into the situation. So I guess what I would say of all of this is it seems at this point unclear exactly what the problem is with these CPUs, but what is becoming more and more clear is that there is a very serious underlying problem that seems to be potentially affecting more systems than we might have initially expected. Again, Alderaan Games doesn't have access to every 13900K and 14900K in the world, but they are saying that in their own testing, and they do have a lot of systems, they're saying that the failure rate is nearly 100%, just saying it's a matter of time. So if this is something where the degradation makes it worse over time, it's pretty scary looking at the future of, maybe a lot of people are fine now, but what's this going to look like a few months from now, a few years from now, if you were trying to use this system for 5, 6, 7 years? Especially because the number of 14th gen chips that are failing, which is beyond what we're seeing just from the 13th gen, which has been out longer, right? Because if this is degradation issues over time, we're already seeing a lot of the 14th gen. I don't know, guys. This looks pretty scary, and I would say that I just don't feel like Intel's response to all of this has been adequate yet, because they just haven't come out with a statement like, here's exactly what the problem is, and here's how we're gonna make you whole if you're experiencing these issues, like give you a replacement CPU. I'm wondering if they're hoping they can just move on to their next gen of architecture without ever really fully acknowledging or solving the problem. Because this is a bit of a disaster, if you ask me. Now, there are a whole bunch of other things we could talk about in today's news. I thought about releasing this as its own video, but let's go ahead and just make it one of my big news roundup videos. So in some maybe more positive news about Intel, although it's not about their CPUs, it's interesting to look at how much better Intel's Arc graphics drivers have gotten for game stability over time since launch. Now, I saw this at videocards.com. It looks like the testing was done by the Hardware Unboxed YouTube channel, where Tim over there basically played through almost his entire 250 game library of games, which features both new games and old games, and looked at their at the stability, like would the games launch? How well did they run? And 93% were playable, 5% unplayable. It was broken down into different categories, where playable was some settings in the game could stay above 40 frames per second and the game would launch without major issues. 87% worked without any major issues. So some of these, that you could get working, there were some problems with the game, but you could get them working. He said 5%, which was 12 total games, were not playable because they either would fail to launch, or they would fail to reach adequate performance, which he was defining as 40 frames per second. And 2% did not work at all. That was Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, SimCity 4, Left 4 Dead 2, and Saints Row. So this was pretty interesting to take a look at, and again, I'd recommend you watch the full video for a further breakdown of exactly which games were having issues. I noticed he had some issues with some of the same games I used when I retested my A770. A lot of people a few months ago when I did that said that, my testing worked out worse than what they were seeing on a lot of other channels. Well, it looks like while I didn't select games particularly to challenge the A770, I used my standard game benchmark suite, which focuses on like the newest, most graphically demanding games. That includes games like Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. It also includes games like Alan Wake 2, which he mentioned in this video also doesn't run properly at launch. It launches onto your integrated GPU into your on your CPU if you have one, and I speculated that was the issue I was having in my testing of it. But in general, he mentioned that the games that were just flat out broken or had serious issues actually skewed toward newer games rather than older games, which is what I've been seeing when I test out new games at launch. Is I've been having more issues on the Arc GPUs, whereas I guess the good news is they've got their kind of back catalog games, they're old, because up and running a lot better, because when these first came out, there was a lot of older games that really did not run well or were broken, and it seems like they've done massive work getting those older games up and running. It's just kind of concerning that a lot of newer games are actually having some issues right now, especially if there's a big AAA release and it doesn't work at all, or works very badly at launch, like Starfield didn't work at all at launch. I think it was Last of Us, when it got its PC release, didn't really work at all at launch. It would crash during compilation of shaders. Again, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, Tim's not being able to get working. Alan Wake 2 not running correctly on the GPU when you launch it if you have an iGPU. Anyway, there's a lot going on there. But Let's move on to a little more Intel news before we go to some other stories today, which is Lunar Lake iGPU benchmarks have been leaked on Geekbench 6, and they have comparable performance to the Radeon 780M and the Arc A380 discrete GPU, which is pretty interesting. However, I'm not going to dive too much into this because I've found that Geekbench synthetic benchmarks don't tend to tell you a lot about the actual gaming performance of these GPUs. So I'm going to wait till we see some in-game testing, because I've noticed that a lot of times Arc GPUs overperform in synthetic benchmarks like this, but then when you get them into actual real-world gaming scenarios, they tend to underperform what we were seeing in the synthetic benchmarks. So I'll definitely want to take this one with a huge grain of salt until we see the actual in-game performance. And another little bit of Intel leaks and rumors side of things is that apparently Intel may be ditching the F-series CPUs with their upcoming Ultra 9 processors, like the Core Ultra 9 285K. Now, what is the F series of CPUs? So Intel CPUs generally, at least many of them, come with a version that has integrated graphics and a model that doesn't, which costs like $20 less generally. So you can save a little bit of money if you'd have a dedicated graphics card anyway and don't want to pay a little bit more for that integrated chip. So the F series were the ones missing the integrated chip, and it's looking like, at least for their Ultra 9 series upcoming, Intel may be ditching that. However, this is, in other words, you would always have the iGPU. Now, it's unclear whether that would be for the rest of the product stack, and it's also unclear whether or not this is true, because this is in the leaks and rumors phase rather than the this is official news from Intel phase. Now, also talking about Intel's upcoming Core Ultra 200K series, it looks like the QS sampling has been moved up, again, according to leaks and rumors, so make of it what you will, which makes an October launch date even more likely for these chips. This is being reported by videocards.com. I believe both this rumor as well as the previous one I reported here about the F-series CPUs are both being taken from Jakin, I may be mispronouncing that, on Twitter, talking about a whole bunch of the next-gen Intel leaks and rumors. So we'll have to see if he ends up being correct about all of this. But anyway, since our theme today seems to be bad news and for a lot of companies, you could check out Gamers Nexus for the latest in issues with, how should we put it, companies leaking massive amounts of customer information. So the latest one is actually from MSI. So he's talking in this video about MSI's warranty records were freely available through a Google search. Now, apparently he was given this information when he was breaking the news on Zotac leaking a bunch of customer warranty and business data. Well, I don't know if leak is the right word, but improperly exposing the servers that contained it to Google searchable, web crawlers. So if you haven't caught up on that, yeah, Zotac leaked a bunch of information there. And when he initially hinted that somebody was having this issue but didn't name the company, he had people reaching out to him wondering if it was MSI, with evidence that MSI was exposing a bunch of customer records. And then at the end of this MSI video, he hints that there's at least one other company that's having similar issues that he didn't name yet. Now, generally, when he hasn't named the companies, it's because it could expose customer data, which he doesn't want to do if that can harm the end user. So he would reach out to these companies like MSI and Zotac, etc., to give them a chance to solve the data leak before the video about the data leak is published. So I'm curious if we're going to get another one of these. Now, this MSI video, again, you could watch the whole thing yourself, but do be aware that it looks like your entire RMA claim records, everything in it, was completely exposed to Google searchable information. It has now been fixed, but again, it had previously been available, and it's very likely that someone could have scraped all of that information. And why he points this out as being particularly damaging to or concerning to the end user is because it would be very easy for a bad actor with this information to pose as an MSI representative, reaching out to you regarding your RMA status. where they could easily scam you, asking like some money to, let's say they're like, oh, we can't replace your GPU, but we could upgrade you to the newest generation for, $50 extra. And then they just pocket your $50 and you never get your upgrade because it wasn't actually MSI talking to you, right? This is particularly dangerous because they would have access to details about your information that only MSI should have access to, meaning that somebody could easily pose convincingly as an MSI representative. That's why this is particularly damaging. So do be very vigilant. If anybody claiming to be from MSI reaches out to you regarding your RMA, if you've RMA'd anything with MSI, because it very likely could be somebody else posing as them with that information. Again, Zotac had similar, although possibly less damaging to the end customer the way it was formatted, issues recently as well. So if you weren't aware of that, and this is on a string of Gamers Nexus kind of taking down these big companies, talking about Asus recently as well, with them just not honoring warranty claims. So a bit of a different warranty issue there. So I think I've seen this in the comment sections in my channel and a lot of other videos about this, where people are just very concerned about what PC, part manufacturer can I buy from? Like, are any of them safe? And I have to say that just in general, while these ones are in the news lately with MSI, Zotac, and Asus, other companies have had issues in the past as well. And if there are a few that maybe have missed being exposed for big issues, there's no guarantee that they won't be exposed in the future as well. Again, there was a hint at the end of the MSI expose that there could be something coming soon from at least one other company with similar issues. So I guess I would just say that in general, I think just having faith in any company and their brand name is just really not a realistic thing. Like using a company's brand name to, it seemed like EVGA had a really good reputation, but they're kind of not really an option anymore. So I just really do think that in the end, most of these companies have serious issues or could have serious issues. And so you're just potentially exposed to issues almost anywhere you buy something from. And that's unfortunate, but it seems to be the reality. And I think the best thing that can be done about it is what Gamers Nexus is doing, which is publicizing these issues in a way that forces the companies to fix them when they are problems. So really, it's just putting pressure on the companies to be better. And that's is the only thing that's going to make them be better. So stuff like this will hopefully improve the situation overall and make companies more concerned over these privacy issues and honoring warranties and all types of these sorts of issues. Anyway, let's move on to some AMD CPU leaks and rumors and types of things. So I saw this at Tom's Hardware, where AMD Ryzen 9 9950X engineering sample gets a full suite of Blender benchmarks at various TDPs showing major efficiency improvements. So we're expecting on July 31st to most likely, that's still kind of a leaked date, but it seems to be when these products are listed as coming available from retailers. AMD's new series of desktop processors. Now, the Ryzen 9 9950X would be the top-end SKU, be the 16-core, 32-thread variant. So massive, multi-threading potential performance here. But how good is it compared to the last gen? Well, Tom's Hardware ran their Ryzen 9 7950X at similar settings, at similar TDPs through the same benchmarks, to test this out. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that Tom's Hardware's test platform was the same as the test platform that was leaking this information. So, again, take all this like early leaked benchmark numbers with a pretty big grain of salt. However, while Tom's Hardware published their numbers here, I actually originally found this in a R Hardware subreddit post, where I feel like the commenters on this post had what I found to be a more interesting summary of the results, where basically what we're looking at here is the wattage the CPU is being ran at, the 9950X's Blender results, and the 7950X previous generation Blender results. And what I really like here is the percentage difference, meaning showing how much better was the new generation processor at each TDP. Now, one thing that's interesting is that it seems like the more power you feed it, the better it does relatively. Now, when I was looking at these specs on these CPUs, it's looking like they're listed at 170 watt TDP out of the box. So that would most put it close to this 160 watt result, which means that out of the box, you might expect a 13% or so performance improvement over the previous generation. But it was interesting that if it got ran at 230 watts, they were seeing a over 20% performance lead, indicating that perhaps the peak of its efficiency curve, at least versus the previous generation, could be higher than maybe where it comes out of the box. That's interesting, but again, we shouldn't read way too much into leaked results like this, where again, how accurate is the leak? And we're not testing on the same motherboard, the same system, all of that. So that complicates all of that, but I think you guys might be interested in that information. Again, the latest rumors are that we would be getting these on July 31st. Now, when will we be getting review samples? I don't know, but it does look like these are out in the wild because we're seeing posts of end users potentially having access to these. Maybe they work at a store where they've been shipped or something. We're also seeing apparently some review samples being shipped out as well. Again, the review embargo date isn't publicly available at this point, but again, the launch date is probably July 31st. So reviews generally either come out same day or one day prior to the public availability. So that would be my guess, is potentially July 30th or 31st for when we would see reviews on these things. Now, the other news for AMD processors is their Ryzen AI 9 HX370 Strix APU, which would be interesting in a mobile platform, is also seeing some leaked benchmark results, showing the Zen 5 chip achieving the fastest mobile single-core performance, up to 27% faster than Meteor Lake. But again, leaked benchmark results, I don't like to lean too hard into these types of things. And again, it's a Geekbench result, which, it is what it is. But if you want to see the leaked results and how it stacks up, it does look to be at the top of the pack, which you would kind of hope it would be at the top of the pack with the newer architecture and all that. But anyway, again, I think just kind of wait for reviews to get too much on this. Now, let's get to some quicker stories here at the end. It's looking like the overall PC market, which had been seeing steady declines recently, is now showing 3% growth in the second quarter, so showing some recovery in the overall PC market. However, if you're into the AR/VR headset segment, that's looking pretty grim, declining by over 60%. And it looks like the Apple Vision Pro is particularly bad. But again, that was a $3,500 headset, so maybe not too surprising. Now, when you dig into the analysis here, they are still expecting the AR/VR headset shipments to increase over time. Like the IDC expects the headset shipment volume to increase with an annual growth rate of 43.9% from 2024 to 2028. So there's still some expected growth in the segment, but it looks like this particular year was a decline by over 60%. Now, in some other news, we're seeing more analysis coming out for FSR 3.1. I did some quick analysis initially on my channel on launch day for FSR 3.1. Hardware Unboxed has gotten some good analysis out there. Digital Foundry has now posted their analysis, and they've confirmed a lot of what we've seen in my video as well as other videos like from Hardware Unboxed, which is that FSR 3.1 does show noticeable improvements over the previous version of FSR upscaling. However, when you rank it up against XeSS and DLSS, especially just on what does the aliasing look like in motion. So this is a freeze frame from motion showing that it's just a lot more pixelated in motion compared to these other, more AI-trained algorithms, which I think is really where AMD needs to make the next big chunk of improvement on it. Now, whether that improvement could be done with a human-tuned algorithm or whether they need to maybe keep FSR as it exists as a fallback method for previous generations, and as they get into newer generations, maybe offer more of a, AI inferenced algorithm type method. we'll have to see where they go with all of it. But again, still the pixelation in motion still puts it at the bottom of the pack, despite some improvements, bringing it, closer to the others overall image quality wise, but still not caught up. Now, in other upscaling news, we're seeing ARM actually introducing their own super resolution upscaling technique called ARM Accuracy Super Resolution. Now, I was pretty interested in this, despite the fact that this being for ARM means this is mostly targeted at mobile stuff, like more like phone gaming, that kind of thing. But if you dig into it, it's actually based on FSR2. Because FSR2 is open source, they were able to use that, and so this looks like some kind of a fork from that technology. Now, what's most interesting about it is their performance increases, they note, versus running FSR2 on these ARM platform devices. However, what they failed to do, other than mention the performance is improved, is they fail to show the image quality comparison against FSR2. They do show some image quality, and it's noticeably worse than ground truth, right? Ground truth, ARM ASR, noticeably worse. They show that it is clearly better than spatial upscaling techniques like FSR1 or GSR, but they don't show the FSR2 image. So while there is increased performance, I'm curious how much the image quality fell off related to FSR2. Because if you could get similar image quality, but at a faster performance, then perhaps, those optimizations could be looked at maybe within FSR as well, because this, again, is also an open source project. Anyway, this was kind of interesting to look at, but I'm not sure there's going to be much there in terms of anything FSR could do to improve. I also saw AMD apparently publishing information about AMD FidelityFX Brixelizer GI, which is a compute-based dynamic global illumination solution, which is now available in SDK 1.1 version. I was going to talk more about this, but today's video ended up being apparently longer than I expected. So I'll leave the source in the video description if you want to follow up on this. The idea is that this is going to be taking less compute time than running DXR, which would be a hardware-based ray trace solution, and this would run quicker at least on an AMD GPU. Again, how it would run on NVIDIA versus their hardware-based ray tracing being faster. Question. But it's an interesting look at other, global illumination techniques that aren't based on hardware-accelerated ray tracing. Now, in other news, we could be seeing higher prices in the future due to TSMC raising wafer prices by 10% in 2025, and it looks like customers like AMD, NVIDIA, all of them are going along with this. However, there is some news that the older nodes could be getting some price reduction now as demand diminishes once they're no longer the cutting edge track. So there's that. In related news, TSMC is seeing its market cap on track to reach $1 trillion. So they're up there on those most valuable companies in the world rankings due to their product being in such demand. And you kind of don't blame them for raising their prices when you see companies like NVIDIA, how much money they can make off of the product they're producing at TSMC. So I understand TSMC wanting to get their cut. But it's just kind of unfortunate for the end user if we end up seeing prices go up because, AMD and NVIDIA aren't going to want to see their margins decrease by 10%. So I would expect them to make that up by increasing pricing. NVIDIA is talking about the fact that the Las Vegas Sphere is running on NVIDIA GPUs. Now, how many of them? Apparently 150 RTX A6000 GPUs are running 3 layers of 16K resolution displays at 60 frames per second. So I always kind of wondered what was going on with this thing and how they made that work. Apparently it's running on 150 high-end GPUs to get it done. So there's that. Speaking of GPUs, if you're interested in a Once Human Edition RX 7800 XT, Sapphire could have you covered, although this looks like it's being presented in China. Now, the Sapphire also is showing a Frostpunk 2 version of the RX 7700 XT, and I did see this one available at Newegg in the US, so at least this one appears to be available more globally, although the list price was higher than a lot of other 7700 XTs, so be aware of that. Maybe that'll come down in the future. Now, what to expect in the future on this channel? Well, today I posted a good power supply deal now on my community page. Now, why did I post that? Because I'm researching deals. Because it looks like we're about to be heading into Prime Day, so I'll be looking at both Prime deals and a lot of other platforms like Newegg will launch deals around the same time as Amazon Prime. Which means there could be a lot of good PC hardware deals available in the near future. And if I do find anything worth talking about, expect at least one and possibly more videos on the channel where I kind of post the best deals I'm finding. If I find anything before Prime Day actually starts like this one, you could keep an eye on the community page where you can see this 850 watt power supply. And yes, Superflower is a good brand. Their LED X3 is good. It's actually what's in the PC I'm filming this video on. And I'm seeing this available at $80, which is a great deal for an 850 watt A tier on the PSU Cultist tier list, PSU, that kind of thing. So anyway, hope you guys found this video useful and or interesting. And I hope all of you have an excellent day, and especially huge thank you to channel members who've clicked the button to join the channel to directly support me financially. That's absolutely huge. As thanks, you get early access to some videos. You get membership badge on your comments and things like that. It's easier for me to find and reply to your comments, all of that. Totally understand not everybody's in a position to do that, but huge thank you for those who have. But thank you to all the viewers, subscribers, commenters, everybody. You're all beautiful people, and I hope you have an excellent day.